Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ESP Professional Development webinar. My name is Paul Roback, and I am the chair of the National Professional Development Committee and also North Central Regional Vice President on the National Board. Thanks for joining us today. I know in the Midwest we're experiencing a little snow, so that's an exciting way to kick off November for us, and I hope everyone else's weather is festive as well. Please take a moment to drop your name and institution in the chat box so we know who's with us today. We're happy to see so many of our members taking advantage of this professional development opportunity. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the archives on the National Association website on our YouTube channel with the other webinars so that it's accessible to our members. And I'll be emailing that link out as well as additional resources after today's webinar. All participants are asked to be on mute during the presentation. However, feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions or make statements you have during the webinar. There'll be time for questions throughout today's webinar as well as at the end. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters today, Dr. Vanessa Spero and Darcy Cole, to share with you, are you disability aware?
Good
Take it away,
morning,
Vanessa.
everyone. Yeah, we are ready to go. So, not that you can't see our little heads on the screen, but here's our heads on another screen. So, my name is Vanessa Spero. I'm with University of Florida IFAS Extension and 4-H Youth Development. I'm a regional specialized 4-H agent, and one of my personal and professional passions is all things disability. And you'll hear kind of Darcy and I, we work together a lot. So we've kind of got that professional experience and expertise. But for me, he's 11 now, 11-year-old son with Down syndrome. He thinks he's 12 already, but I have to remember he's 11. And so he's really kind of shaped the way I look at the programming and the clientele that we have in our extension programs. So I'll send it over to Darcy to introduce herself.
All right. Well, here in Minnesota, it's afternoon. We're right at lunchtime. So, good afternoon for those of you who are on Central Time Zone or later. As Vanessa said, I bring that personal and professional passion around this work. This is a part of what I do for my work here in Minnesota. More of my real work is around program operations. So, a lot of the logistical things that happen behind the scenes with our staff. I have four kiddos from that professional or that personal stance, and my oldest two, who are 16 and 13, both have autism. So that's where some of that passion for me lies, and around making sure that programs like 4-H are accessible to young people like my kids personally. All right, as we get started, I want to just share a few kind of grounding comments as we get going. One of those is we want to make sure that everybody feels this is a safe space, and that, when you're sharing pieces, we don't want people to be judgmental about that, because we know that we all may have questions or different personal or professional experiences that we are coming to this work with. We also want to recognize that we're all learning together, so that means we're going to make mistakes together sometimes, right? So it's okay to do that as long as we acknowledge that and continue to do a better job and move forward in this specific area of work. We also want to make sure that we recognize that everyone deserves respect, regardless of whether they have a disability or not, and regardless of what abilities they may have to do things. And then we also recognize that people can be uncomfortable when we talk about disability work, and uncomfortable that they might say the wrong things, do the wrong things. They might not know what should happen in certain situations. So sometimes we don't do anything because we're afraid that we're going to do something wrong. We want to encourage you to be uncomfortable and to acknowledge when that does happen, so that we can all work together to be more comfortable in this work, because when you first start this work, there's probably no way you're going to be an expert or be comfortable in this, just like any other work that we do. But we want to make sure that we're encouraging you at the least to take small steps to develop that comfort level, so that eventually you can feel comfortable and proficient in supporting young people with disabilities in your programming. And then we also want to make sure that you realize you can reach out to Vanessa or myself before during this presentation, whatever that might be after, and share questions, concerns, comments, or if there's things you just want to talk more about and you'd like someone that you feel like maybe can give a different perspective or that you can bounce ideas off of, you can always reach out to Vanessa or I to do that. All right, so what we're going to do today is really we have two kind of main objectives for you. First one is we are going to help you gain some knowledge about the history of our disability movements and some of the terminology that you might hear when we talk about working with people with disabilities. Obviously, we can't go over every piece of important history or every piece of important terminology, but we're going to share with you some of the key highlights of that. We also want you, by the end of this time, hopefully to gain a little bit of personal and professional awareness of working with people with disabilities so that you can support making those inclusive environments. Doesn't mean after this webinar you are going to be an expert in this, but hopefully you gain something out of this that will make that work easier for you.
And, none of us are experts at all. And I like to say that I'm an expert in Down syndrome because that's what I know the most of, because that's what my son has. So that's, where I spend most of my time. We also kind of wanted to introduce, Darcy and I do this work together on the Access, Engagement, and Belonging Committee, so AEBC. And that is, you may hear us slip into saying youth all the time because we're both youth professionals. So we understand we have a diverse group at ESP. But what our group does is we're a national committee with professionals and colleagues across the country, and we address professional development for 4-H agents and really any extension staff. And the idea is to bring that awareness, to bring resources to help to address some of the needs that our community is looking for so that they feel more comfortable in this space. And so you can talk to us more about that. We'll have our contact information again on that last slide. So you know where to find us. We are not hiding out. So one of the things we do like to go over first is, and because this is almost one of those uncomfortable fear factors when we talk about ADA. So what exactly does ADA, what are we looking at? So a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of an individual. And this is the definition for disability. So being regarded as having such an impairment and a record of such an impairment. So what, impairments are going to be across a variety of different physical, sensory, intellectual. We'll talk a little bit about that, I think, on a later slide. And where does that ADA fit into the programming that we do? And so we are held to those standards, but sometimes it is about making that accommodation, that reasonable accommodation for our clientele. And so it is giving the opportunity for someone with a disability to tell us that they have a disability and they need something, whether that is a sign language interpreter or that is a wheelchair ramp or something that would help them to be able to participate in our program. And so that is a requirement that our programs make sure to seek that information. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that every accommodation can be made and that we can make all of the changes because they may not be reasonable for the situation that we're in or the building that we're in. But it's good to be aware of that and what that really means for our programming and the clientele that we're working with.
All right, so Vanessa kind of hinted at this a little bit as she was talking about that definition of what a disability is. So when we talk about disabilities, we're really talking about 4 different categories of disabilities. So one of those are physical disabilities. Those are the things that are oftentimes the easiest to see. We can pretty easily see if someone is using a wheelchair. So these are the ones that are the easiest to identify because they're very visual for us to be able to tell. They're things that with any type of disability, it's also important to recognize that some of these are going to be permanent disability, so something that someone either was born with or acquires at some point in their life, but it's going to be a part of their life for the remainder of it. We also have things that are temporary disabilities. So those are things that might be maybe due to an injury or an accident or a surgery that you might have. And at some point, I would guess that all of us will have some sort of disability, whether that is a permanent or temporary disability. Some of those physical things, like I said, that's the easy piece to see, the part that we can easily recognize, the piece that we can tell, even if someone maybe doesn't choose to disclose that information to us. When we talk about sensory, those are disabilities that oftentimes we can't see. We sometimes call those invisible disabilities, and all of these remaining kind of three categories can fall into that. Sometimes we can tell someone has a sensory disability by looking at the way they're interacting in their environment or the way they're moving, but that isn't always the case. And that's why it's important that people hopefully have a comfort level with us so that they do feel confident to be able to share with us. Because if they don't share with us or disclose that they have a disability, we can't make accommodations because we don't know what they need. And sensory disabilities are one that's important to recognize because much of how we interact with and take in the world comes through our sensory processing system. And if we aren't interpreting that in the way that others around us are, it can create some big challenges. We also have things that are called intellectual disabilities, and those are disabilities that provide us cognitive impairment. So things that might make things a little bit challenging mentally for us to be able to do. And then the final type of disability is mental health disabilities, and those are things that can also be very debilitating and can impact both with any of these disabilities with the person that has the disability, but those around them. Those mental health disabilities, those ones really can be come and go. Like some days they might be a big struggle or a barrier for some people. Other days things might be fine. And those, again, can have a big impact and are one of those things that oftentimes we can't tell unless someone chooses to disclose it to us.
And I
And
also
then on
wanted
this
to,
next, yeah, yep, go ahead.
sorry, I just also wanted to add, a lot of times we hear developmental disability. So when you hear about developmental disability, that's something that was diagnosed before the age of 18. So it occurred and was diagnosed. So a lot of times you may have a developmental and intellectual disability, as well as you may have intellectual, cognitive, sensory. So there may be more than one disability that is present. And oftentimes that is the case where they kind of there's more than one diagnosis.
Mhm. All right, this next one, I know there's a lot of things on this screen. So these are just some examples of different types of disabilities people may have. This is not an all-inclusive list by any means, but it's important to recognize that people with disabilities are common in our communities and that they encompass many more things than we might think about when we hear the term disability. All right, then our next slide, we're gonna, with this again, help us recognize the prevalence of disabilities. So you can see here, this is data from 2020 from the National Center on Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities with the CDC. And you can see here that 26% of adults in the US have some sort of disability. So a very large amount of people have a disability. So if we're standing with a group of people, 1 in 4 of us are going to have that, which again, sometimes we can tell that, sometimes we can't tell that by looking at someone. But it's important to recognize that that means that all of us, regardless of what the population or demographic is that we work with in our program, is going to have people that have disabilities, whether or not we know it or not. All right, then next slide, Vanessa. There we go. Perfect. So it's also important to recognize that there are lots of different ways that someone might think about or refer to a disability. On the screen, you can see just a sampling of the terms or the words that you might hear to describe a disability, and different people are going to use different terms based on their experience and based on what they're comfortable with. So just recognize that there are many different ways that you're going to hear disability referred to by people, but we would encourage you to think about how someone refers themselves and use that same sort of language when you need to. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa, who's going to lead a little bit into talking about some of the disability laws that impact us.
Yeah. And so just that last word on the stigma that really is part of the disability community. And so sometimes we can't really understand if we haven't experienced it. And so the disability community is the disability history is a young history. it definitely followed after a lot of other movements. And so kind of grasping the idea that not so long ago, some of this stuff was still happening. That in, 1990 was when the American with Disabilities Act was enacted. So, we think about it, it's been around for a very long time, but it really hasn't. And so we have to recognize that and understand that for the people that we're working with. So if you look at it, a lot of the disability movement actually follows the civil rights movement. They were kind of that movement was kind of the forerunner for what was to happen later for the disability community. And so, 1964, that's the first Civil Rights Act. And then you look at 1972, that's the first Center for Independent Living. And what does that mean, independent living? So independent living is an opportunity for people with disabilities to be able to be functional, to be competent, to be capable, to be recognized as such, and given that opportunity. And so that was in 1972, our first kind of center like that was created for people with disabilities. In 1973, protections for within the Rehabilitation Act. So we're talking about work and having the ability, if you have a disability, that you could get a job, that you were seen as this in the same pool of applicants. 1975 is when we started recognizing that children also needed access to a free and public education. And so originally it was the Education for All Handicapped Act, but it was later renamed and amended to what we hear now, which is IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it was 1990 when ADA came into play. And what does that mean? It means that we started to recognize again that those with disabilities deserve the same rights, deserve the same opportunities. And then over time, obviously, amendments are made on a regular basis to kind of look at what those laws say and where they need to be changed, updated, how that affects people. And so those are addressed on a regular basis. Looking at the social movements that go along with the disability history, we look at the independent movement, independent living movement. And so that's when, again, it's somebody with a disability saying that I can do the things that somebody without a disability can do. We look at that civil rights movement as being a forerunner, and deinstitutionalization is, that's a major social movement. And some people may remember where a child was born with a disability and, okay, your child is born, here we go, we're going to put them in an institution. We're not going to give them an opportunity to have education. We're not going to give them an opportunity to spend with their family and their community. I think about my son, and had he been born, 20 to 30 years earlier, I would have been encouraged to give him to an institution and just let him live his life there. And so not even being given an opportunity to be a human, to have access to what we have access to. And then demedicalization is really when we're starting to think about that not every disability is something that needs to be or should be cured, that people are people, and to recognize that. And so what is it about somebody's disability that makes them unique, makes them contributing to society, makes it so that they have value, and that should be recognized when we're working with people with disabilities. So we've got quite a bit of related terminology that we can throw out. And we don't tend to go through every one of these definitions because a lot of them are probably a little familiar, or we've probably addressed them at some point. One of the things we sometimes do forget is that diversity, disability is included within that definition of diversity. When we're talking about universal design was originally created in the architecture community when we started thinking about putting wheelchair ramps, at sidewalks, making sure that somebody had access to the road and to the street and could get back onto the sidewalk. And that wasn't happening, originally when we were creating sidewalks in cities. And so eventually that universal design was more than just architecture, and that moved towards learning also. So what are some of those important elements that we can use with all learners that help them to understand the content and help them to process the material to the best of their ability? When we talk about effective communication, we're talking about making sure that we either provide the devices for someone to be able to communicate back and forth with us, or also, our communication with someone else. Are we talking to that person as an individual? Are we getting down to their level, and working with them? Same thing when you're with a kid and you get down to their eye level. And so thinking about those same things, with the disability community also. Darcy, do you think we need to throw any other ones in there? I think most people have heard some of these words. So I'm gonna
Yeah, and if there's something you want us to talk about that you see on here, you can put that in the chat and we can absolutely
Yeah.
address that too.
All
All
right,
right, then we're going to shift gears just a little bit and we're going to start thinking more about the environments that we're in for our programs, who those participants are that are participating, and what things we need to consider when designing our programs so that they're going to be accessible to all people, regardless of whether they have a disability or whether they don't have a disability. Because when we do specific things or we plan for people with disabilities, it's important to recognize that when we make accommodations or when we are thinking about universal design or doing some of those practices, not only does it make a better experience for people with disabilities, but it makes a better experience for everyone, even those that do not have a disability. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa, and we're going to look at a specific example that some of you might very easily relate to because this is part of your work. So
this is when we're really 4-H agents. So, when you look at this picture, what are some of the things that you notice? And you can unmute yourself if you want, or I don't know if you guys want them to, or just put it in the chat box and we can read it out. We're so used to having the call out system.
yeah, so think about if you were in this environment, or someone else was in this environment with a disability, what are some of the challenges that they might face or things that we should consider when thinking about accommodations to make this a more accessible environment for everyone? If I see the first one in there, super noisy.
Lack of wheelchair access. Limiting space for those in a wheelchair, no floor level seating, standing or climbing to sit, shavings may be hard to navigate, seeing through the gates. Wheelchair and bedding is an issue, crowds and overwhelming. Yep. Bright lights. Absolutely. I would say you pretty much, I think we got just about everybody hit on those. We got them all. Awesome. So yeah, we do. Sometimes we don't think about the environment, and obviously there's a lot of things that are beyond our control. But if we could control, what would we control? Whether we were given that information ahead of time or we weren't given that information ahead of time. And we know that sometimes we don't have the ability to know things in advance. But what we want to do is we want to encourage our clientele to tell us the things in advance, to tell us how we can always do better so that we can address the situation to the best of our ability. And so just sometimes thinking about it, we just see the typical 4-H fair and this is the norm, but it's not the norm for everybody. Not everybody sees this the way we may see this.
Absolutely. Thanks for playing along with us and looking at that example and hopefully making yourselves more aware of the things in the environment that we might not even have to consider ourselves. So as we are thinking about supporting people with disabilities in our programs, I want to just give you some few ideas about strategies and how we can help to overcome things that might be challenging in our environment. So first of all, we need to assess the needs of people in our program. That means we need to have some sort of way for people to be able to make accommodation requests, right? We need to be able to tell who's going to be in the room and what they need to be successful. We need to also make sure that we are addressing the barriers that people have to participating. So you can see some of the things we talked about on that previous screen. There's definitely some things that we could do to make that environment more accommodating for people. We also need to determine what resources are available in our program. And as you heard Vanessa mention earlier, we can't always make every accommodation request that comes in because some things just aren't a reasonable accommodation because they require us to change the program to an extent that it no longer is the program that we were originally doing, or maybe the facility or location we're using, there isn't a way to change that. And we can't go someplace else to do it because that's the place where we have to do that activity. But again, like determine, what are those resources? What do you have to help you? And that might be things that cost money. It might be things you already have that you can revamp and use in a different way. It also might be resources of people who can help support you in this work. It's also valuable for us to create partnerships with providers or other businesses, organizations, communities, partners that can help us to address some of those gaps that might be in services for those people with disability and to be able to help really increase the life skill development for people. I mean, that's a big part, especially when we talk about the 4-H program itself. Like that's why we do our work, right? Is to provide positive youth development activities that can increase life skills. So we want to be able to focus on that. And that's important because everybody should have the opportunity to develop life skills, whether they have a disability or not. And for those people with a disability, it can be even more important that we're providing those life skill development opportunities because they may not get them other places, because they may not feel that every place in their community or environment is a safe place for them to participate, either because of past experiences that maybe haven't been successful or that haven't gone well. So again, like really be thinking about how we can make sure that we are addressing those needs. All right, then we need to think a little bit about barriers. So Vanessa, if you want to go next slide. Perfect. So some of the barriers that we may have when we're supporting people with disabilities is one of them is accommodations. Because again, like we're going to make any reasonable accommodations that we can, but some of those things cost money. So we might need some money to do that. Might need some expertise to help us determine how we're going to make those accommodations. Another barrier related to accommodations is that people have to disclose to us that they have a disability and they need to share with us specifically what things we can do to support them and make them successful. So again, like that's a key piece. Another barrier that we might face is attitudes and perceptions. Some people don't necessarily view someone with disability in a positive way because maybe they were raised at a time where people with disabilities weren't a part of the general community, or they may have had an experience that makes them think something otherwise. But it's important to recognize that when we are interacting and work with people with disabilities, we want to always make sure that we're presuming their competence so that they can do things on their own, that they can be independent, they can advocate for themselves, and be successful, just like anyone else in our program. And then another barrier is specific disabilities may have things that cause extra challenges for them in their environment. So one of those might be when we think about medical, right? So if you have a medical disability, you might have challenges or barriers related to vision or hearing equipment. You can see some of the examples there. Another one is underdeveloped motor skills. So some things may just be more challenging for someone because of the fact that they don't have the same strength to do something as their peers might. And then sensory overload also can be a really big barrier, especially when we think about a lot of the environments we might hold our programs in. Sometimes if we're in a classroom setting, we can really control the noise level, what the space looks like, feels like, but not all of our programs are in that type of controlled environment. So there's always going to be those opportunities for there to be things that are really overwhelming and challenging. So we need to make sure that we're addressing it the best that we can and also providing places for people to be able to step away, take a break, and be able to be ready to come back and successfully participate again. All right, you can go to the next one. Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. Then we also want to talk just a little bit about, again, that supporting development of people, whether that is youth or whether that's adults. We want to make sure that we are giving that opportunity for life skill development. We are giving that opportunity for people to be integrated and included in our program. And when we talk about inclusion, that means like they are really an active participant in our program. They are doing all the things that other people are doing. They're contributing, they're gaining value and providing value. Doesn't mean that they're simply in the room, because just being in the room doesn't necessarily mean that it is inclusion or that someone is included successfully. We also want to make sure that we are supporting someone's physical health and their well-being while they're in the space. So making sure that we're providing an environment that's comfortable for them and that is physically, emotionally safe for them to be in as well.
And I did want to kind of add a little bit about this slide too. I think sometimes that, we take for granted that someone is in our class to learn the content, but it really goes beyond that with some of this independent living with our disability community. So when we talk about life skill development and integration and inclusion, and physical health and well-being also, we're talking about getting somebody outside the house. We are a community program. Extension equals community program. And so our clients are all of our community members. So when we give them an opportunity to come to whatever we're teaching, we're giving them an opportunity to be a part of the community, to socialize, to continue to develop some of that skill set that maybe is a little more difficult for them. If that is somebody who is not as independent as some of our typical clientele, that's giving them an opportunity to go to a new environment, to go outside their comfort zone, to meet new people, to feel like they have a part and a sense of belonging in the community. And so a lot of what I've been doing lately in some of the programs that I work in is I don't just work with youth with disabilities, but I also now work with young adults with disabilities. And, initially it was all about knowledge gain, but what we've found is that a lot of our clients, a lot of people that have come to our program, it's more than they came there to learn. They came there to be with people. They came there to have a group of friends. They came there to get out of the house. They came there to get new skills that they weren't getting at home. And so that has actually created new opportunities for them to volunteer with our extension program in the county that I live in. And it's all about just opportunity for them. And now then there's purpose that goes along with that. And so that's what we're really thinking about when we think about that development, that holistic development of people in our community.
All right. Then we've kind of, I think, hinted at this the entire time, but we want to make sure that we're always encouraging participation with all people in our program. That means being able to provide ways that people can share what accommodations are successful or needed for them in order to participate. In 4-H, I know that many of our programs have some sort of accommodation request process that looks different from state to state and even county to county across some states. In the middle of your screen, you'll see there, that's a 4-H accommodation request form that we have here in Minnesota. It's a way that our young people or family members, whoever that might be that's advocating for them, can just share a little bit about what is helpful for us to know about the young person's needs and what we can do to specifically make them hopefully successful in our program. And we also, along with that, we're encouraging staff to make sure they're always asking questions about accommodations. So on those registration forms, whether it be in our 4-H world, event registrations, whether it's county fair registrations, that they are specifically asking the question about what accommodations they need to be successful, and making sure that when we are marketing things, that we're putting accommodation request statements on all of those things so that people can see that we want them in our program and we want to support them however we need to. So lots of ways that throughout that course of registration, promotion, that we're including wording on those things that let people with disabilities know and their families that we want them in our program, that we see the benefit of them being there, and we want to support them however we can. So you also see on there, there's an example from Vanessa for Barnyard Challengers. That's just a piece there where you can see very specifically, right? And this is something that, might be targeting this audience a little bit too, but again, has that wording about, if you have a disability and you'd like to participate, it kind of explains how that's going to look and feel, so that people can understand that. And again, really clearly see that we want them to participate in our program. And that's a big piece of that, because if we aren't clear about that, people may not see themselves with a disability as someone who fits into what they think our program is. It might not might not be reality of what our program really is, but it's that perception of what they think we do and who we are. All right, with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa here for some things. So.
Yeah, and actually, as you said, Darcy, targeting, and that is actually an example of a program that we do that is targeting people with disabilities. It is open to anybody, but some of the programming that we've started to do is targeting the disability population. And why? Why? Because come to our programs, see what we're about, see who we are, and see how you fit in. And then the goal is if I can get you in the door to a 4-H program, know that you're welcome, know that we already acknowledge that you have a disability and we've welcomed you into our program, then I'm hoping that you don't just stay in this program. I want you to go to the other programs. I want you to join another 4-H program. I want you to be active in the county-wide programs that we have going on. But if this means that I can get you comfortable, I can get the child and the caregiver, because oftentimes when we talk about disabilities too, even if it's an adult, there may be still a caregiver in the picture. And so that caregiver has to trust you too to bring their adult child to your program. So it's okay sometimes to think about encouraging participation by making it maybe a little more specific for certain populations. Again, it's open to all, but it sometimes just makes people a little bit more comfortable, and that's the space that they want to be in initially as they're learning about what we do in extension. And so we can do that for people, you know. So other ways that we can think about just encouraging participation, but just designing our programs with intent. So again, a lot of what we talk about when we're even being more specific for disability, it helps everybody. The things that we could do for one learner is going to help all learners at the end of the day, oftentimes. And so one of those is to become a little bit more familiar with universal design learning. So that concept is really bringing in multiple formats to help somebody learn. So instead of just a PowerPoint, there's the speaking, there's the opportunity to do something hands-on. There may be a video that's included. There may be information before or after the session that is given to participants. And so all of those things kind of help to capture how that learner may learn best. And one of the things that we've kind of always learned, I think, early in our educator career was, oh, what type of learner are you? I'm, a kinesthetic learner. I'm a visual learner. I'm an auditory learner. That's just wipe the slate clean. Everybody is every type of learner, depending on the content of the material that you're learning about at that point, depending on the stage of the life that stage of life that you're at. You may learn better with mathematics, one-on-one. You may learn better with, English language arts by hearing it. So it's going to be different depending on the content. It's going to be different depending on your age, on how you learn. And so we have to recognize that for all of our learners. And that's really kind of where universal design learning comes in. And then there's regular things that we can be doing when we are educating our clientele. So the captions, I definitely found a caveat here with the captions though, because I'm presenting right now today. And so it's capturing everything I say because I automatically have captions on all of my PowerPoints now. But because I'm on headphones right now, so it's not capturing what Darcy is saying. But luckily, Zoom is capturing everybody. So Zoom captions are the way to go for sure. I have learned a lesson. Providing transcripts. PowerPoint does a great job now with just general features, looking at your contrast, putting in the alternative text. And I really, really highly suggest if your university isn't addressing this is to, or they haven't addressed it specifically with your extension program is, get in touch with the Disability Resources Center at your university, your communications departments, whoever's putting out the flyers and the marketing and doing all of this, they should be aware of the things that they can do to be ADA accessible. I know at University of Florida, we're pretty much doing an overhaul on so much of our content that is on our web and making sure that all of these things are in place because it's not just for people with disabilities. It also is if you are, English is not your first language, then a lot of the stuff that we're doing that may have been directed toward the disability community is actually going to help somebody who's learning English for the first time because getting the audio and getting the captions and getting the transcript, all of that is going to help them even more so to be able to understand that content. And so that's really where it comes in is what are the things that we're doing that we could just do a little better, that we could do address for all of our audiences, and it's going to help everybody. So definitely things to think about. That program design is major. Where can you tweak your program?
All right. And then whenever Vanessa and I do any presentation about disability, we like to include a little bit about etiquette, because that, again, one of the barriers for people to engage people with disabilities is the fear that they're going to say or do something wrong. So, we want to just share a few tips, tricks, if you will, when we think about disability etiquette to hopefully make you more comfortable in connecting with audiences of people with disabilities. So, one of those is that we want to make sure that we're always asking before we help. So, we want to assume someone's competence, that they're able to accomplish a task for themselves before we just jump in because they have a disability and we think they can't do something. And that's important because none of us want someone to come in and take over so that we can't be independent in completing a task. And that is no different for someone with a disability. So make sure that you are always asking before you just help someone. It gives that person that opportunity to say no, like, I want to do it. And it might be a struggle for them, but it's also an opportunity to develop some skills. And again, that like just sense of pride in being able to accomplish something, even if it is difficult for that person to do. Another tip we would have is don't make assumptions. So don't assume someone can or can't do anything. Make sure that, again, you're asking when people need help, letting them ask you when they need help, and always assuming that they can do something until they tell you otherwise. Another key piece of disability is to make sure that you're always speaking directly to the person. And the reason that's so important is it is not uncommon for someone with a disability to have some sort of support person there to help them be successful. It could be a sign language interpreter, it could be a personal care assistant that's there to help them throughout the course of their time with you. But it's important to recognize that that support person is not the participant in your program. They are the accommodation. They are the person who's there to help them be successful. So when we're having that conversation, even if it is through a sign language interpreter, we should be looking at the person, not at the interpreter. That interpreter is just being that accommodation, being that in between so that we can have that conversation with that person. The same is true with that PCA or personal care assistant. We want to make sure that we're not asking that PCA questions about the person that they can answer on their own. Again, we're taking away that person's power and that opportunity for self-advocacy if we are leaving them out of the conversation and having it with someone else. And think about how uncomfortable that would make you as a person if you have somebody there with you and they're asking questions about you while you're standing right there and could answer those questions. So again, make sure that you're talking specifically to the person, even if there is a support person there, because they are there to support them, to be that accommodation, not the participant. I also want to recognize that we should be very sensitive about personal touch and personal contact. And that's important because we don't want to be leaning on someone's wheelchair, bumping into them because they may already have balance issues the way it is. So we want to just be extra careful about how we might be throwing their balance off while they are interacting with us in space. Another key piece of etiquette is, and this is true like for any part of our programming, we want to make sure that we're developing relationships, but it's even more so important when we talk with people with disabilities. And part of that is that we want them to feel comfortable with us so that they are okay with struggling sometimes, if it's going to be good for them to be able to develop those skills and they want to be, comfortable that people aren't looking at them, judging them when they're trying to do something that maybe others in their space can do really easily. It's also important because the stronger relationships we have with people, the more they're going to share with us about their disability and about their needs and what we can do to accommodate that. Because if you don't have any sort of relationship, it can be really hard for someone to share with you because it's personal information and it's information that they may feel makes it so that there's something wrong with them, right? Or that there's a challenge that everybody else can just do, right? So we want to make sure that we're developing those relationships where they feel confident to be able to talk with us and really advocate for themselves. Another piece of etiquette is we want to generally use person first language. If you're not familiar with what that is that means when we're referring to someone, we would say like the person with disability or the girl with autism, versus like saying, that's a disabled person. Because with that, when we're using that person first language, we're recognizing first and foremost that they are a person and that disability is just one of the things in their life, right? It's just one of the things that describe them. So again, like make sure you're using that language in general. There are some audiences that actually prefer disability first language. Those tend to most commonly be people with autism and people that are deaf or hard of hearing. And for them, part of that is like they see those disabilities as a definer of their life. It's who they are, it makes them unique. But I would encourage you to listen to how people are referring to themselves and use that same language. Or if you're unsure, you can always ask them how they would like us to refer to their disability. And at the same time, recognize that we don't have to always talk about their disability either, right? So there are times that we do need to, and when we do, use person first language unless they tell you otherwise. Um, Otherwise, just refer to them by their name, right? Because we don't need to necessarily call out those disability pieces all of the time. I would also encourage you to avoid using the term normal for people that don't have a disability, which we might just not think a whole lot of that, right? But it's important because when we're referring to something as normal, it means that we're referring to everything else that's different as abnormal, right? Or that there's something wrong with that. So make sure that you're avoiding that term whenever you can, just because again, it helps to just make sure that we're thinking that everybody can do things and that there is no normal or not normal. We're all people. We all have different levels of abilities to do things regardless of whether we have a disability or not. I would also encourage you to check registration information, whether that is like in our 4-H programs, we have enrollment processes where people have the opportunity to share about disabilities or needs that they might have. I would guess that across your full spectrum of programming, when they register, there hopefully are opportunities for them to share accommodation information. Make sure that you're actually looking at that, being proactive with it. So it doesn't mean looking at it 5 minutes before your program and going, oh man, like we have these things that we should have thought about and accommodated. So make sure you're being proactive, looking at it ahead of time, and making sure there's opportunities for people to share that information. And along with that, make sure that somehow, again, you have an accommodation form, you have a statement that people can reach out to the organizer of an event and have a conversation, whatever that looks like, but just make sure that there's opportunity for people to recognize one, we want everyone in our program, and we want to make sure that we can help anyone be successful, whether or not they need an accommodation or not. So that's the brief overview. When we share our resources, we're going to share with you some different links. And on there, you're going to see one for University of Minnesota 4-H. If you click on that, there's actually a disability etiquette sheet that you can pull up that has some of this general stuff, but also has some specific disability etiquette based on the type of disability somebody might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa to work on kind of wrapping us up.
Yes, so we've got the resource slide right here, and this PowerPoint will be made available so you can kind of grab some of those links if you need to. Darcy, I don't know if you can even throw them in the chat box if you want to, so people have them directly. This is just, you know, scratching the surface of what universities are doing. And when we talked about the accommodation form, I know we had some people from Ohio out there, and the winning, I can't remember what it's called, the winning page, winning form. So
The
that
winning
one,
plan, I think.
there
Yep.
is the winning
It's the winning
plan. I
plan.
can't come up with the word.
Mhm.
So that was really popular, that a lot of states, when they saw that, said this is a great idea. One of the things we have to remember is that sometimes people don't disclose, not because they're trying to make our lives hard. They're not disclosing because they're afraid they're not going to be able to participate. They've already had plenty of experiences in their life that they've been told they can't participate. And so sometimes they just want to show up and not tell you things, not to make your life hard, but just to be able to be there, to be there in that space. I think we have one of the things we also kind of wanted to share is that Darcy and I are doing more webinars, actually not just Darcy and I, but our entire team. We've got an awesome team. And so these are some of our upcoming webinars that we're going to be doing. And you can see that we had, an hour today that we can barely get through any of the content. And so oftentimes people are asking us for more specific webinars to say, hey, can you address this topic? Can you go more into depth into this topic? And so this is what we're trying to approach with these webinars. At the same time, I do want to say that Darcy and I make ourselves and our team make ourselves available to work with universities to share some of this information or to go dive deeper. We've done that with a couple of other universities too, because we know that there is a need and we are always happy to share as much as we possibly can. So I'm not going to really go into this because I think this was actually a duplicate slide that we probably didn't need to have in here. But if you think about where you can be in this, is just your awareness, being at a session like this. It's that first step to say, maybe I need to learn a little bit more about what I don't know about. There are so many different types of accommodations you can address without even knowing that somebody has a need for that accommodation. And so, we did one slide on it, but there's plenty of other resources out there that can help you make to start to think about not just maybe the educational content of the program, but the space, just the physical space. How is it set up? We've done some work with at University of Florida with occupational therapists and just the overall room design. How inviting is that room for anybody with a physical disability? Did we just automatically put in the space for anybody with a walker or a wheelchair to come into the room? Simple things like that just create an open space and a sense of belonging for anybody instead of scrambling to move all the tables at the last minute. And it's not a hard thing to do. And it will not come automatically unless we start to think about these things intentionally. One of the things too is sometimes we put rules and requirements into our programs, and sometimes it's good to address those. What are those rules? Why are they there? If it's for safety and for risk, absolutely, it has a purpose. But is that inadvertently telling someone you aren't welcome in our program? And this is something we deal with a lot in some of our 4-H programming and our youth programming, where we've put rules and requirements about this for the fair and this for the record book, and we're not contemplating how that may be difficult for someone coming into our program, especially if they're not familiar with us, to feel like, oh, maybe a change could be made. Maybe I do have a place here. And so it's a mindset, it's kind of thinking a little differently about what we're doing on a regular basis and just opening the door a little bit more so. So I know a lot of people know Dr. Grandin. I know she's been at a lot of extension conferences and done a lot of talks. But she really has some amazing resources out there that speak to how she thinks. She admits, she is a proponent of those with autism. And so she is out there kind of speaking about things that we may not all be familiar with. And so it's a great way to continue your learning. There's an immense amount of documentaries that are out there just to kind of, again, put yourself in someone else's shoes to help to learn to identify a little bit more. And so with that, I think we have some time for some questions. There's our contact information. Please feel free to contact us.
Great. Thanks, Vanessa and Darcy. The first question that is in the chat box is, can you put in the chat box the webinars that are coming out so that people can get those links? So also send that out once the video is uploaded and ready to be emailed out to everyone as well. And then the next question
Yeah, and
is,
I can grab a link to the flyer that has all of that registration information. So I'll grab
great,
that quick while
thanks.
you're.
Then the next question in the chat box is, when hosting an event, who's responsible for the accommodations? There's confusion between the host, department administration, and university accommodations office.
So I think overall, who is putting on the event, who owns the building. So if it is a county extension office, and that's a partnership between your university and your county, so they're both going to be responsible. Your building, may have been built by your county and it's being paid for by your county, and so that they should have as many, make it as easily accessible as possible. But if it's a building from 30 plus years ago, it's not going to be up to ADA standards. It may not have a ramp. It may not have all of the features that you need. And it's not a reasonable accommodation to build, to completely change a building. and that's why as we build new buildings, all of those things, those features are regularly being put into new construction. But also it goes back to it is, a partnership program. So your university needs to be able to say, well, that's when you connect with your disability resource center and find out what they can help you with, what they can assist with. Ask them for the funding for if it's a American Sign Language interpreter, like can they help you to secure that, to help you to fund that. And so you have to ask these questions because it's going to be different and people will probably try to pass the buck if they can and say it's not my responsibility, but it is everyone's responsibility. And Darcy, I don't know if you can speak to the legalese to that a little bit more than I can, but I would say it's
No,
everybody's.
I mean, I think it's everybody's responsibility, right? Like, 'cause whether it's the facility, whether it's us doing a program, we all need to be aware of it and we all need to make sure that we are as accommodating as possible. And I think as professionals, we may sometimes need to even think about where are we hosting that program, because sometimes we do have control over the environment and that facility and we can make accommodations. Other times, like Vanessa said, you can't necessarily change something in some places. And that might mean that then maybe that facility we're hosting our program in is not the right facility. And we need to look at some place that is more accessible, and change that location. And granted, sometimes we can't, right? Like it's our county fairgrounds. We can't just pick up everything for county fair and go host it someplace else. And then we just have to work within that and think about if we can't change the environment. Are there things within the environment we can change? So, for example, like our local county fairgrounds, there are no push buttons on any door for someone to be able to push a button and open up a door that's in a wheelchair. So that might mean that if we're hosting a 4-H activity there, that we have someone who is identified as a designated greeter who holds the door for everyone that comes and greets them. Another, like, again, creative way to think about how do we overcome a facility challenge or barrier for people that is beneficial to everybody, right? It's beneficial to someone who's pushing a stroller. It's beneficial to someone who's in a wheelchair, or that maybe just has some mobility issues and pulling open a heavy door and going through at the same time isn't always the easiest thing. So just think a little bit about that. I did throw a couple links in the chat. One of them is the promotional training flyer for our AEBC disability series that's coming up. We did do one already, so that's why when you saw it was number 2, 3, and 4. That first one was just kind of an overview of disability, and then these other ones are things that are specifically like diving more into it. And then I also did there was a personal question that came to me about accommodation request form. So I did share a Minnesota one, but also know that there's lots of different forms out there. And one of the things you'll want to make sure that you're talking with your university about is what type of questions can you and can't you ask. So like here, we can't ask you to like tell us what your disability is, right? We can't just put a checklist of disabilities and you check the ones. Like we have to put questions that are open-ended where you can choose how much you want to share of that. And we really focus here in Minnesota around what do we need to know about you that's going to impact your success, and what do you want us to do, right? Like what's the accommodation that we can make to make you as successful as possible.
And I do want to add to, yes, we ran ours through legal at our university just to make sure we weren't overstepping a boundary. And you cannot require anybody to fill out an accommodation form. That is a resource that we make available. We tell everybody about it, but it's not where you would go up to somebody, assume they have a disability, and say, hey, would you fill this out for me? You cannot do that. So it really is more of a, we have this available for everybody. It helps us to do a better job. If you fill it out, we can help you to have a better experience. And that's really what its intent is. Hopefully that kind of answered the question. If not, you can always email.
Well, thank you, Vanessa and Darcy. We've come to the end of our time together today. A very enlightening presentation. I do want to share that our next webinar is December 8th. The topic is building entrepreneurial friendly communities in the outdoor recreation sector, and will be presented by Gwen Stewart from Ohio's Alpha Eta chapter and team members from both Ohio and Minnesota. So we look forward to seeing you all on December 8th. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll be emailing out the recording as soon as it's posted and ready to go. Thank you.